Hello everyone and welcome to my world's top 25 list. Now I will be doing a top 25 instead of top 20 like they did in the past because now there's 4 seeds from the major regions, so there's just more teams and more players, so squishing that all into 20 players is really difficult. I think oftentimes these lists bring a lot of controversy and a lot of people have discussion and opinions, but I think encouraging ideas of discussion is great, and the whole reason I'm doing this is just to share my opinion as to how I view each player around the world coming into Worlds 2023. I've tried my best to compile all of these players into a top 25 list, and just for context, my decision based on where I rank them is on 2 things. One, how their year has been and how they've performed all year long, and secondly, how I think that they would perform at a World Championship and would I choose them for a team on a World Championship. Alright, let's get started. Coming in at number 25 is Doran from Gen G. Now, Doran has had a lot of bad sentiment around him over these last few years, was regarded as a bad player under pressure, struggled with emotions, but I feel like as the years have gone on, he's gathered a lot of experience, and that experience has helped him grow as a player to then have one of his best years, I feel like, where he's definitely not a liability on Gen G anymore, especially towards the end of summer. I think the meta is shaping up really well for him, with Renekton, K'Sante, Jax, and Gnar being the prevalent picks right now. We saw that he was able to blind champions like GP throughout the year. We saw in the finals that he can play the Camille Aatrox matchup and he can play Aatrox, so that was a big plus for me, showing his depth of champion pool coming into this World Championship. So I'm expecting him to do a lot better at this year's Worlds than he did at last year's Worlds. Coming in at number 24 is Canyon from D+ Kia. Now, Canyon had an amazing Worlds last year. He almost single-handedly won them the series against Gen G to push them into the semi-finals and take them into the top 4 of the World Championship. He's been regarded as one of the best junglers in the world for a long time, but this has been a little bit of a shaky year for Canyon, which is quite uncommon. Normally, his performance is such a high level and also quite consistent as well at that high level that it's hard to ever find faults and mistakes in his gameplay, but I think this year, a bit of a struggle for D+ Kia overall. The team has just not looked like the super team that was promised. They've been having issues figuring out their playstyle, but Canyon has remained somewhat consistent in the chaos. You know, he won the most POG points in summer, which is a plus in terms of, if you don't know what POG points are, they're kind of like MVP votes, and his form got a lot better towards the end of the year, as well as DK's form in general. But this is a player, to me, who will always perform internationally, and as much as the D+ Kia has had all of these struggles, you know, players like Deft, Showmaker, and Canyon being on the roster, for me, Canyon especially is a player who I look towards as a player that will innovate and perform at a World Championship, and that's why he's on my list. Coming in at number 23 is Xiaohu from Weibo Gaming. Now, this might be a bit of a surprise to everyone, but if you actually watch Weibo's journey, one of the main reasons that they're at this World Championship in the first place is because of Xiaohu. He was the most consistent player on that roster. He's a player who will take games into his own hands, which I value quite heavily when it comes to how I rate a player. You know, when a game is in an even state, or you're, you know, being kind of choked out of your own jungle or whatever it is, or the map state is not in a great spot, having that one player that'll make the decision or make the decisive play to turn that around or give you some angles where you can force in is really important, and that's exactly what he does for Weibo. He's had this narrative around him that he's the king of spring and he never finds huge success at Worlds, but he has a wealth of experience, and his performance this year was really, really good. And despite not being in the top 5 mid laners for me at this tournament, I really felt like he deserved to be in the top 25 list. Coming in at number 22 is Mikyx from G2. Now, Miky was my number 4 support of the top 5 supports of the tournament. He won MVP of the year in 2023 here in the LEC. He's had a great year, and even last year on XL, I think he had a great year, but coming back to G2 is really where he started to shine. I think ever since the engaged support meta has come in, he's been really on point in team fights especially, and you could see that in the season finals. That tied in with the creativity of lane picks that he has, such as, you know, Poppy support, Lissandra support, Talia support, and just watching his progress throughout the year of the innovation that he's had in the support role. There's an argument to say that he is the best Western player coming into the tournament. You take all of that and you add in the fact that he's had the high highs of Worlds finals and Worlds semifinals as well, tying into his best year. I feel like as a player, that's the big reason why Mikyx is on my top 25 list. Coming in at number 21 is On from BLG. Now, On is just hands down one of the best mechanical supports in the LPL. You can look at the LNG series where they lost in the summer playoffs and say that him and Elk struggled in that final series where they played the weak side wrong and got caught out here and there and lost out on the bot side of the map. But to be honest, engaged support meta is really a place where supports can show their strength, and that's why rating these players, you'll hear me say engage a lot, because I feel like that's really where you can see the difference maker in teamfights. I feel like On's definitely got that flair behind him in teamfights and in the engaged support meta, but I think he also has this flair of hook champions, which might sound a bit weird, but he's one of the biggest Nautilus Blitzcrank players we've got in the LPL. He has great flexibility, and I think the most important thing for me that functions well with On, especially in a team like BLG, is he has really good move timers with Shun. It's not his lane phase, it's not just his engage supports, whatever it is, or his counter pick supports that he shows with these hook champions like Blitzcrank, but it's just his move timers with Shun for early skirmishes or teaming up for Herald fights, where I think that BLG finds a lot of success in the early stages. Coming in at number 20 is BDD from Caedrel'S. Now, BDD wasn't actually on my top 5 list for mid laners of the tournament as well, but he's having one of the best years of his career despite coming off of the back of one of the worst years in his career in Nongshim. All of KT won first All-Pro in the regular season, but I think if anyone deserved it the most, not to take away from the others, it was definitely BDD. Yes, he still plays his signature Azir pick as he always does, but he's actually shown a lot of variety as the meta has progressed. You know, the Nico, the Annie was great, the Tristana where he's been finding some lane success too, and I feel like a lot of KT's success is attributed to BDD. Overall, very strong player, amazing year, and has a wealth of experience, and we saw what kind of damage he could do last time he was at the World Championship in 2021. So get hyped for BDD because he definitely deserves to be on this list. Coming in at number 19 is Elk from BLG. Now, I like to call Elk Elky Love because his whole year and playstyle is so similar to Jackie Love in the way that he approaches mainly fights. He'll always flash in, Gale Force in, and find the break point of a fight, play on the edge, which can sometimes come back to bite him. Similar to On, like I said, amazing regular season, but struggled in their final best of 5 up against LNG, where the bot side really didn't find too much success and was dying to timers, which they definitely should not do. And now a lot of people might wonder, why is Elk so low on the list? Maybe you agree, maybe you don't. Now, I think the big reason I put Elk a bit lower on this list is that he really shined in the Aphelios meta, but Aphelios priority has dropped off a bit, which might hurt him at Worlds. And the reason I haven't put him higher on the list is because I think Kai'Sa is going to be a staple pick for bot lane and coming into Worlds, and he hasn't shown much Kai'Sa all year long. You know, you've got a tournament with players like Gala and Ruler and Peyz and all these players who will pick Kai'Sa and has shown a lot of success on Kai'Sa. And as much as Elk probably can play it, he hasn't really shown that success yet and was really reliant on champions like, you know, Aphelios and Zeri. So we'll see how he shapes up at this tournament. Coming in at number 18 for me is Gumayusi from T1. Now, I put Gumayusi above Elk in my top 5 list, but they're right next to each other in this top 25 list. And I think the main reason for me for that is that it's very hard to rate T1 players super accurately coming into the World Championship because of the stain that Faker left after him having to take a break and them not having him for weeks, and looking at how exposed T1 was. But then the flip side of this miracle run that they made to the finals is a bit jarring to figure out where the players really stand. Despite Faker coming back and them having a heap of games together, the team only really found a couple of styles to get them to the playoffs because of low practice, I imagine. But Gumayusi was definitely one of the players that really stepped up for T1 when they needed him. He basically got them across the finish line to get them into the finals in the first place after taking down KT. He's always had, and I think, this clutch factor around him. When other players might be scared to make a play or scared to pull the trigger in some fights, Gumayusi has always been the player for me in T1 that steps up to the plate and clutches it out for them, which I value so highly, especially coming into a World Championship. It's also kind of crazy to think that this is Gumayusi's 3rd World Championship already with T1. You know, semifinals into finals, and now this is his 3rd championship. I think Gumayusi is going to be an exciting player to watch. Coming in at number 17 is Shun from BLG. I think Shun is the 3rd best jungler coming out of the LPL and one of the biggest surprises all year long, coming up through IG Young into then transitioning into the main team of IG over the last few years to eventually debuting on BLG this year. Mechanically gifted player, and one of his biggest strengths that I talked about earlier is his way that he moves with On. These two just seem like they're always on the same page and finding plays together, or like just being this kind of pillar of early game, mid game that BLG needs. But it's also what he provides BLG through top lane, helping Bin get early leads and carry matchups to then kind of leave him to do his own thing, whether it's setting up for ganks, zoning away the enemy top laner from waves, as well as finding angles to pull off dives or indexing resources into Bin is really where I think BLG's strength comes from. So it's his way that he plays with support and top to make sure that BLG has stable early games. And to pull this off is one of Shun's biggest attributes, I think, and that's what he provides to the team. He does have some psychotic pathing where he invades, which he showed during the regular season, and I feel like psychotic pathing or just volatile gameplay is embedded in LPL junglers' blood. Coming in at number 16 is Zeus from T1. Similar to Gumayusi, it's hard to rate T1 players, but Zeus I think was the other standout next to him when Faker was gone especially. A lot of their wins without Faker came from Zeus single-handedly gapping top hard enough to leverage a lead through lane to win them games. The stain that the Worlds Finals left on Zeus kind of stings a bit for his expectations at Worlds, having lost out quite hard to King in a counter-pick matchup and giving over Aatrox. But everything outside of that and his performance this year was great. You know, he hasn't dropped in form at all. The question is just whether he will show up at this tournament or not. And from my perspective, I think he will. I think he's grown a lot since last year's Worlds, will be a reliable factor for T1. And you can never really look at a lot of the series that T1 have been losing and look at Zeus and say that he was the issue. So yeah, I think consistent factor and excited to see how he does. Coming in at number 15 is Delight from Gen.G. Now, Delight has been such a pleasant surprise this year, even getting robbed of Finals MVP to me. If you look at his Blitzcrank and his Rakan game in Game 3, this guy, what a playmaker he is. He seems to have found so much confidence as the year has gone on, and I think that the meta is heavy team fighting skirmishing right now, as I talk about quite often, and teams who find success are strong in that category, and I feel like Delight is a standout in that category. The only thing I'm cautious of when it comes to Delight is, of course, similar to Shun, this is his first international, well, his first year of internationals, his first World Championship, and performing on the biggest stage. I believe it when I see it. Now, Delight's got all of the resources and skills necessary to do so. He's proven himself more than enough domestically. It's just a case of getting to World Championship can really break or make a player, and that's why I'm a bit cautious of putting him up higher on the list, despite such an amazing year. Coming in at number 14 for me is Tarzan from LNG. Now, to me, Tarzan is the third best jungler in the world. I even remember when I was a pro player in 2019, I was watching his games and studying Tarzan's play in Griffin. I remember watching one of his VODs one day and seeing that he was playing Olaf with biscuits, and it confused me so much I didn't get it. You know, oftentimes you'd go things like approach velocity or cosmic insight. But I realized that when I watched the game, he would invade second Raptor respawn in a carry jungle matchup and kill the enemy jungler or fight or push back the enemy jungler in a 1v1 and use the biscuit to win that 1v1. And from that moment, I knew that this guy had something special about him, and he was incredibly creative. He just feels like such a consistent jungler. Now, obviously, that was 4 years ago. I'm just giving the example of how innovative he is. I mean, this guy, every game basically on tanks is going to build Redemption and Knight's Vow. He has like this unique style of supportive jungling that he does in team fights and in the mid to late game, and he's just a rock. I feel like this guy is so hard to shut down in the early game, and it's a very, very consistent pather and hardly ever makes mistakes. Coming in at number 13 is Faker from T1. Now, Faker was my 5th best mid laner coming into this tournament. And again, T1 is hard to rank in my opinion in general, but Faker is an interesting one. You can look at his lane phase and argue to me that it isn't the best in the world, and I'd agree. You can argue that his team fighting isn't the best in the world, and I'd also definitely agree. But looking at the utter collapse of an entire team when he was subbed out, going from contesting a top 3 standing to then dropping to the performance of an 8th or 9th place team over the course of weeks, to then him coming back and then bringing them to the finals is a bit crazy to me. I think that just highlights the intangibles of what League of Legends is as a game and what players can bring to teams. And what that specifically is for Faker, I'm not sure. He's the most successful player ever. And whether it's his voice in the team or his reliability in the mid game or the way that he moves around the map or an aura that he brings, we won't know, and I don't think we'll ever know. But it's impossible to argue the value that this player brings to the team, and that's why Faker is on my number 13. Coming in at number 12 is Peyz from Gen.G, and man, what a debut year Peyz has had. From breaking kill records to winning Rookie of the Year to having to fill the shoes of Ruler was always going to be so tough. And he was hyped in the academy last year, yes, but I think this guy's year has been almost flawless. His positioning in macro and fights is some of the best in the world, some of the best team fighting you'll see. He kind of has the reliability of Ruler, but also he has the aggression levels of players like Elk. For me, he's one of the best AD carries in the world right now, and is a staple late game insurance for Gen.G. Especially if the meta is Xayah Kai'Sa, I think that's Peyz's bread and butter. But I think, again, when making these lists and expectations for how they'll perform at a World Championship, I always am a bit cautious around rookie players and their debut year at international events. And so that's why Peyz isn't higher on my list. I'm going to keep him in at number 12 until we see how he performs at his first World Championship. Coming in at number 11 is Yagao from BLG. Now, even I was a Yagao doubter before MSI. There's a moment in the finals up against JDG in spring 2023 where he makes a crucial mistake on Syndra and flashes backwards instead of forwards into a charm and dies, and I think that's actually caused a lot of waves in terms of sentiment as to how good Yagao was, especially considering that MSI would be straight after this. People thought that this guy would be a weak spot on BLG, could definitely be exposed, but actually, as much as I was on that train, MSI is where he stepped up, and he had a huge performance at MSI, in my opinion. And I think that kind of silenced all of the doubt, and making one mistake is one thing, but running away and taking a narrative out of it is another, and I think that should be removed. His lane phase isn't the most oppressive, but I think part of his strength is his map movement, and has always been his shining light. Being first to fights, leaning to sides, map movement is really where Yagao finds the most of his success. He won't destroy you in lane, he won't get incredibly egregious CS leads, but he will always be at the right place at the right time when it comes to moving around from mid to join fights in time. Coming in at number 10 is Missing from JDG. Now, Missing is one of the best Rakans in the world. Missing goes under the radar a lot when it comes to players like Ruler and Knight and Kanavi being on his team, but in an engage skirmish meta, he is the best support in the world at finding the perfect engages in skirmishes. Now, JDG's team fighting has always been regarded as the best in the world because every single one of them plays the fights to almost peak perfection. Everyone's doing their job correctly, and Missing slots into the team almost seamlessly that he's sometimes never talked about. He is and always has been a career engage player, and the only thing you can be concerned about when it comes to Missing is if the meta ever shifted into lane phase range supports, where I think Missing would struggle and be a bit more exposed than he is now, but I expect that won't be the case. We'll keep the same meta that we've been seeing all throughout summer, and he will be a staple factor as to why JDG finds a lot of success in these fights. Coming in at number 9 is Gala from LNG. In my eyes, Gala is the second best AD carry in the world. Now, RNG in spring was an absolute disaster for him. It was kind of like watching Viper on Hanwha Life. He was just so good, but the team just wasn't functioning and giving him the space and the game state to be able to perform. But ever since he joined LNG, you could see the instant upgrade. While LNG's regular season wasn't the main change, it was the way this team performed in best of 5s, taking it to JDG, going to toe-to-toe with them across 10 games in 2 series. You could even see it in the regional finals against EDG, you know, Gala's performance just sweeping aside Uzi. The main reason he is so high on my list, and as I talked about World's expectations and hyped up for me, is because the meta is perfect for him. Xayah Kai'Sa meta with Gala on your team is ideal. I mean, he is the best Kai'Sa in the world in my eyes. Coming in at number 8 is Bin from BLG. Oh, Bin. The confidence oozing, camera punching, best carry top in the world. Bin has had a bit of an interesting year, from being unmatchable on carries to getting a reality check by 369, the tank top, so the staple for teams moving forwards towards the end of spring, to then him trying to play tanks at the start of summer and finding success, only to just drop them after a few weeks and go back to bruises and carries by the end of the year. I think the top meta is perfect for him. It's ideal. You know, he is probably the best Renekton and Jax player in the world, as well as having K'Sante as a staple, and him always having Fiora and Gwen and Camille up his sleeve. He's an incredibly lane oppressive player, and he has such insane wave control. Even in their series against top esports, he won both sides of the same matchup against Wayward, Renekton K'Sante. He's a really reliable split pusher, which the team uses very well to their advantage to find leads, and yeah, Bin for me has just always been such an amazing player all throughout the year. Coming in at number 7 is Scout from LNG. Wow, Scout, what a standout year. Winning back-to-back MVPs in spring and summer in the LPL. I saw some fans call it out because, you know, JDG was sharing MVP votes amongst 3 players, Ruler, Knight, and Kanavi. But you can't take away the fact that he's definitely earned it. Even with Gala on his team, he won it in summer. There's a bit of a stain on Scout as well. Last year's Worlds up against Zeka in Game 5 leaves a bit of a mark on Scout's international appearances, where, you know, he got solo killed 4 or 5 times and arguably lost him that game, which lost him the series, which got them knocked out. But I mean, this guy is a world champion. He's one of the best and most consistent mids out of the LPL, and is the core of LNG all year long to get them where they are today. There's no doubt in my mind that Scout will have a great tournament, and looking at that one game in isolation last year and coming to a conclusion about Scout is unfair on him. I think he will be one of the best mids at the tournament. Coming in at number 6 is 369 from JDG. Now, 369 and Bin are such opposite style players. While 369 was once a great solo carry kind of player, busting out Jace and Gangplank back in the days on top esports, he's kind of slowly shifted his style into a more tank-orientated nullifying role. Despite knowing that I think 369 can definitely play carries, he's just the opposite of Bin. Bin is the carry, 369 is the tank and teamfight. And the value that 369 brings to JDG as this rock that can basically go as even as humanly possible in even or bad matchups on these tanks, and the value that he brings to teamfights to attribute to the team's success, is something that I can't ignore. I think coming into Worlds, we'll see 369 play K'Sante Renekton as his bruisers and Gragas Ornn as his tanks, or Poppy when the draft needs it, or Gnar if he ever gets targeted. This player is just an immovable object, and no one has been able to capitalize on how much he sometimes gives up in-game or in draft and been able to find a sizable advantage against him. I don't think he'll be getting exposed at Worlds either. I think 369 is the rock of rocks, and that's why for me he's so high up on the list. Coming in at number 5 is Peanut from Genji. Now, Genji has become this insanely well-oiled machine with so many parts working in harmony, but alongside one of the biggest parts that we'll get to later, I think their macro game and plans are insane. I think that their macro and game plans are the biggest piece of the puzzle, and I think that stems from Peanut. Peanut is a player who's had the highest of highs in his career, beating some of the best rosters in existence. to the lowest of lows in Genji and Nongshim a few years ago. Remember that Rox versus SKT series? Yeah, that was 7 years ago, and Peanut is still top of his game. He won back-to-back-to-back LCK titles. He has just become a leader for Genji, and I feel like a lot of the reason why Genji is a slow-paced team who just chokes you out slowly with better map movements is because of Peanut. I attribute a lot of that to him. They're so precise and clinical in when, where, and how to fight, and as well as having some of the best early games of any jungler in the world, I think Peanut is one of the most important pieces of that team. Coming in at number 4 is Kanavi from JDG. Wow, Kanavi, the X factor of JDG. As much as Knight and Ruler are these super carries and Missing in 369 are these pillars of engage, Kanavi is just the most complete jungler in the world. He can play anything and everything, and he hardly ever falls behind. You can use him as a carry for the entire team or as a supportive player for fights in frontline. He will still path to almost perfection on any champion, be at the right place at the right time, execute his job in fights, and it's very rare to see him ever make even one single mistake. I remember last year playing against him in Champions Queue at Worlds, and as much as maybe this is a very terrible measure to use, I actually got the pleasure to play against him 3 games in a row and jungled against him. And some of the small things that I picked up on is that his information usage against you is incredibly frustrating to play against. You have no idea if he's covering a lane or on your opposite side camps, and reading him becomes so difficult, and the only time you'll ever really know where he is when he's in your face contesting your camp. So yeah, after playing against him a tiny bit in Champions Queue, maybe it's not the best, but most importantly, watching him all throughout this year, I can safely say that I think Kanavi is the best jungler in the world. And as a standalone jungler, he has taken the top spot from Canyon, who I think was a similar sort of player this time last year. Coming in at number 3, we have Knight from JDG, the golden left hand. Now, Knight has been promised to fans for years that he's this god tier mid laner, and I think people have started to realize it recently, especially this year. If you watch the LPL or MSI, you would just see the caliber of player that Knight is, especially on his prime picks like Ahri, Jace, Annie, and Syndra. Even in the highest pressure matches, you can see him perform. Even when they're down 2-1 in the summer finals against LNG, it was Knight's Ahri that lifted them back up to put them on match point in the first place to get them into that game 5. And then in that game 5, it was Knight's Nico that managed to make what I think is the game-winning play to get them the first Baron and get them the gold lead in that series to actually be able to close it out and become the champions. So you can't even say that there's a chance that he won't perform under pressure. Lastly, I think Syndra is going to be a staple pick for mid at this tournament, and I think Knight is the best Syndra in the world. Coming in at number 2 is Chovy from Genji. Now, the discussion between Knight and Chovy as the 2 best mids in the world and who is better is a very, very hard one. I think they're both so close in skill level, but to me, Chovy is just the tiniest cut above. Even the smallest differences between them are fun to look at. For example, Knight doesn't play much Azir. He hasn't played it even once this year, whereas Chovy just doesn't play Syndra. He's played 2 games in his career and lost both. These 2 champions could be staple picks at Worlds. The reason I chose Chovy over Knight is because, as I said at the start of this video, I'm choosing based on yearly performance and how I expect him to perform at Worlds. And I can agree with the argument that Chovy has had some moments, especially last year at Worlds, where he choked in the series versus DRX, and I won't shy away from the counter arguments, and they're very valid. I suppose what swung me in this direction is the faith that I have in Chovy after watching him all these years, that he will perform with this World Championship as he's gathered this experience, and I also think that Chovy has a slightly better lane phase. And as an analyst, lane phase for me is very valuable, and I feel like Chovy has a slightly deeper champion pool. It's annoying because you can look at the champion pools and point out that, well, LPL playoffs was on 13-13 and LCK was on 13-15, and that's why Chovy showed more of a in-depth champion pool in the playoffs. We would have a more complete answer if the patches were the same as to what Knight's champion pool would look like coming into Worlds. But after seeing Chovy all throughout the year and seeing the amount of different champions that he can play, I think Chovy will edge him out there slightly. Using the argument that Chovy gapped Knight in the Asia Games is absolutely useless and has no foundation and should not be used. I saw a lot of fans using that as the primary argument as to why Chovy is better than Knight. That was so many patches ago, and the difference between the 2 teams was just so unfair in Knight's favor. So please, if you are discussing who's the better mid, do not use Asia Games as an argument. I'm just so excited to see these 2 face up against each other, and I don't think you can talk about Chovy without talking about Knight, and I don't think you can talk about Knight without talking about Chovy. Number 1, the best player in the world to me is Ruler from Genji. Every time I see this player in a team fight, it's impossible at times to even point out the smallest of mistakes. It feels like his team fighting is sometimes piloted by a robot, and he is hardly ever a liability to the team. He is just the most complete AD carry in the world. His history of success is undeniable. He's a world champion, he was a world's finalist, he finished top 4 at almost every Worlds he's attended, he won the LCK last year, he had some incredible moments at Worlds last year despite them being knocked out, and was a big factor as to why Genji was winning games. He comes across the LPL and has won everything with JDG as the best team, and him being the backbone next to Knight. He is just the catalyst for world-class League of Legends and world-class success. I'm pretty sure you can check almost any game in the entire LPL this year, and Ruler is probably farming near perfectly, performing in any game, and team fights to almost perfection in every single one of them. He is such a pleasure to watch, and I can't wait to see the damage he's going to cause at the World Championship this year. That was my top 25 list. I hope you enjoyed the video. Sorry, I'm a little bit sick right now recording this, so maybe my voice is a bit weird to listen to at times. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. I'm really happy that I can share all this Worlds content with you and be able to cover this tournament as a content creator. And I hope this sparks a lot of discussion, because I know the top 20 lifts haven't been done that much throughout the last few years, and hopefully this sparks a lot of discussion and we can all get hyped for Worlds. So yeah, don't forget to subscribe, and yeah, see you when the World starts.